Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to our final webinar for our HOPP Summer Research Seminar Series. This afternoon we'll have a professional development talk specifically discussing careers in science. If this is your first time joining, my name is Vicki Bowden and I am a project manager here in HOPP. So the way the session format will go, after I make my introductory remarks, the majority of the time will be with the panelists. They will discuss their personal background, academic and professional training, as well as their research focus. And towards the end of our session, we ask everyone to use the Q&A feature here on our webinar to submit questions, and we'll address them towards the end. And again, I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have Alexis Jones, Dr. Lilitha Ramanathapuram. We have Michael Keenan, Dr. Keenan, and also Kinnaman, sorry about that, and Dr. Rodrigo Romero. Again, thank you all for joining, and I invite our panelists to close, and we can start our session.
Hi there, Alexis here. Vicki, it says I can't start video because the host stopped it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and enable you to turn on your video in a sec. Okay, you should try to start your video now. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis. Thank you guys for joining and thank you for having me. So I am a research assistant and laboratory manager for Dr. David Sullett. Dr. Sullett does a lot of work in genetics, specifically looking at mutations across tumors from patients all across MSK-CC. And my role in the lab, so I am more of a supportive role in the lab. So since I do laboratory management as well as bench work, I actually have a project and I assist other postdocs that are in the lab, graduate students that we have as well with their projects. So I'm kind of like the person that kind of jumps in between everything that goes on that's laboratory, wet lab related. And what I do specifically is I work in melanoma, and my job is to look at different mutations, so kind of the more uncommon mutations that patients who are resistant to current lines of therapies, what those mutations are and kind of how we can overcome them and look at the cellular pathways that those mutations affect and see what kind of drugs and other therapies that we can come up with to really help folks who are resistant to current lines of therapy. So that's a little bit about what I do. So my personal background, I am a native New Yorker. I am born and raised in the Bronx, New York. I went to high school here. If anyone went to environmental studies, high school in Manhattan on 56th Street, that's where I went. It was a specialized science high school. So I've always loved science since I was young. I was just one of those kids that just had an aptitude for something, and I kind of just kept it going throughout my career. So after high school, I went to Boston College and I was a major in biochemistry. So I did my BS in biochemistry. And after that, I went on to Mount Sinai here in New York City and I did my master's in biomedical science. So I've just been science for the majority of my life. I've loved research. The thing that I like about research is, it's fun. Like I'm in the lab and every day is different. I have to come up with ways to solve problems. And for me, it's kind of, I don't see myself being a very 9 to 5 doing the same thing every single day type of person. So if you feel like you want something that's exciting and it's evolving all the time, it's fast paced, it's changing, then I definitely think scientific research is something that you probably would really enjoy doing. So that's a bit about my personal background and research interest. So thank you guys again for having me here, and I'm excited to answer some of your questions during the Q&A. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Alexis. Now we invite Lilitha.
Hi everyone, Really nice to be here. Thank you so much, Vicky, and to the SSP program for inviting me. So I am a senior program manager managing the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy. It's one of the cancer immunotherapy centers at MSK. So PICE, as we all know it here in its short form, essentially it's a collaboration among 400 plus researchers across the United States, all of whom are cancer immunologists and are all dedicated to the mission of using the immune system to help fight cancers. And my role at MSK specifically is to manage the operational, administrative, and research aspects of PICE at MSK. This includes essentially, so how do we do that? We essentially support a lot of basic science research projects in areas of cancer immunotherapy, clinical trials, and also strengthening immune monitoring resources, specifically around like cancer immunotherapy, just to see how the treatments that are being given to patients, how are they responding to it, and how can that information be used to make these treatments even more better. I've been here at MSK for a little over 4 years now, and it has been really exciting. Similar to Alexis, my life has revolved around science for a very, very long time. My personal background is I am from India. I grew up in this city called Calcutta, which is in the eastern part of India. My schooling was all in India, so high school. I did my undergrad and got a master's degree in human physiology. And around that time, I sort of knew that I wanted to stay on in research and academia, and started exploring options available and applied to PhD programs in the United States. And that's how I came here. Right now, it seems like a very long time ago. And I came to the US first. My first stop was the University of Arizona in Tucson, which is where I did my PhD. It was specifically in cancer immunology. Immunology has always held a very special place in my heart. It's something that I got interested in when I was in high school, like just learning and talking about basics of the immune system and how it's harnessed to fight infections on an everyday basis in all of us. And I got the opportunity to specifically work on cancer and the immune system for my PhD thesis, which was really great and sort of cemented my interest in the field. I sort of shifted gears a little bit after my PhD. I moved to New York, and I was a postdoc at NYU College of Dentistry, where I was working on oral cancer and the immune system. So still sort of continuing in the same research trajectory, but I was also getting my degree in public health at the same time at NYU. And public health, getting the MPH was certainly a very eye-opening experience for me, because so far I had been very focused on basic lab research and doing things on the bench and thinking about hypotheses and experiments. But public health really widened my horizon in terms of viewing health very, taking a much more broader view on health and disease, because a lot of what we studied and projects I got involved with through my MPH program was all about, okay, what are the other factors aside from an individual's, health and, or let's say specific like immune system. There are so many other factors that influence someone's health. These could be social determinants like, the background or the economic background, the socioeconomic background of the person, and where they live, what kind of food they get to eat. So it really sort of got me thinking about health and disease in a very holistic manner. So that was also, I was very happy that I made the decision to get into that area of work. After I finished my public health, my first actual job outside of lab was being a project coordinator for an NIH-funded malaria research project. Project was based in India, although it was an NIH-funded project. So the award was at NYU. So I was sort of working between New York and India for a period of 5 years. And my main job with that project was to set up field sites at 3 different locations in India to actually study the epidemiology of malaria in India. And this again involved various aspects of that I was managing, which included setting up labs in remote locations, equipping these labs, training people to do basic molecular biology and immunology. And that in itself, again, was a very, very rewarding experience. But since my heart had always been set on cancer and immunology, around the time that that project was coming to a close in terms of its funding, and I had started looking for other opportunities, I sort of knew I wanted to shift gears back to cancer and the immune system. And this particular position at MSK had just opened up. So I think it was very, very lucky for me that I actually could find a position which sort of fit these different experiences that I was coming from. So from a basic research background, from a project management background, and that's how I ended up here. So thank you again for having me today, and I look forward to conversations with all of you.
Thank you so much, Lilitha. Next, we'll have Dr. Mike Kinnaman.
Thank you, Vicki. Hello to everyone. My name is Michael Kinnaman. I'm a pediatric oncologist here at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I focus specifically on pediatric sarcomas, which are tumors of the bone or soft tissue, muscle. And appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about my journey to where I am today. So I grew up about 100 miles north of Manhattan in a little town called Woodstock. You may have heard of it. Very famous for a big concert that happened back in 1969. A lot of the residents there still are living the dream, but it was a very interesting place to grow up. But small high school, probably 120 in my graduating class. I knew I liked science, but I also really enjoyed political science or law, or the idea of going to law school when I was in high school. So when I started college, I went to the University of Michigan. I chose Michigan. It was a big public university, good academics, good social scene, and had big time college athletics, which was important to me at the time. And so knowing that I liked both science and political science, I just kind of decided I'd do a double major in biology and political science and see where that took me. I honestly thought I was going to go to law school after college. But things kind of changed as college went on. I was fortunate enough to be accepted into this undergraduate research program at Michigan. It was called the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program, and you kind of get linked up with someone in the science world, either medicine or outside of medicine. And through a family connection, I was linked up with a urologist who does oncology work at the University of Michigan Hospital. And basically I started off really simple with research. I would do chart review, basically combing through patient records and filling up a database, and help kind of populating this database to help answer some of the research questions that the group had. But, as that work maybe isn't so exciting, it does, working with the principal investigator at the time allowed me to shadow her in clinic and go into the operating room and kind of be exposed to medicine. So as time went on throughout college, I kind of started seeing myself more, getting more interested in medicine. And then I had one of these kind of epiphany moments where it was my sophomore year, right before Christmas. I had broken my finger in a flag football game and had to get two screws put in it. And then it was finals, so I didn't take my post-operative antibiotics because I was just too focused on studying. Ended up getting post-op infection, had to get admitted to the hospital for IV antibiotics, and kind of sitting there by myself while everyone had left for their winter break, and I was just being cared for by the nurses, residents, attendings. Like I really just I was like, yeah, I could see myself doing this someday. So kind of fully committed then to a career in medicine. And I finished, with a dual major in bio and poli-sci. I didn't abandon the poli-sci because I still really, enjoyed that aspect of it. I took a year off between college and medical school. I worked in Boston for a year. I know a lot of people give you different advice on that if you're going this route, but I thought it was useful, kind of get some real world experience, live your life a little bit for a year. I got to live with my best friend from high school in Boston. We just had kind of a fun year. I was a clinical research assistant at Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston. So continued kind of this work in cancer research, but on a kind of from a different perspective, helping enroll patients on the clinical trials. And during that year, I kind of applied for medical schools and went on my interviews and was lucky enough to be accepted at Stony Brook out on Long Island. Did 4 years out of Stony Brook. If you're thinking of med school, don't be intimidated. Med school is a lot of fun. It's hard work, but a lot of fun at the same time. You meet a lot of great people, make whole new lifelong friends. I think that's the exciting thing about science in general is every step of the way you're, in your career, you're forming new relationships with different people and really forming a lot of lifelong friendships. But it was at Stony Brook where, your third year of medical school, you go through all your rotations, and it was pediatric oncology where I really found myself kind of being pulled towards kind of like more of like a gut feeling. Also, you're going to find this along your careers, like you're going to, find mentors that really inspire you and people who you want to be like. And, I found someone like that when I was at Stony Brook. So I kind of knew I wanted to do pediatric oncology, but as you guys know, once you're done with medical school, you got to apply for a residency. So to get to pediatric oncology, I had to do a pediatric residency. So I ended up going to the Children's Hospital Montefiore in the Bronx for a 3-year pediatric residency. And while there, I also confirmed my desire to pursue pediatric oncology, again, working with that patient population. And I had done some summer research during college at Memorial as well as Columbia. Again, doing kind of outcomes research, chart review. And my mom had actually been a secretary back at Memorial for 15 years, from like 75 to 90. So like it always had a place in my heart. So it was, when I applied for fellowship, that was my top choice. And so I did the joint pediatric oncology fellowship between Memorial and New York Presbyterian across the street. And what's really interesting about pediatric oncology fellowships is your first year, you do all clinical, seeing patients, either an outpatient or on the inpatient side. But your last 2 years, traditionally, you either join a lab and pursue some sort of research interest, or you can pursue a master's in clinical research if you want to do something more clinically. But you have to do something very like research oriented during your last 2 years, and you do about 80% research, 20% clinical during your last 2 years. I joined Christina Cabuzio's lab at Memorial Sloan Kettering. She studies clonal evolution in cancer, so how cancer changes over time. And while her lab was a pancreatic cancer lab, I brought kind of their expertise and applied it to pediatric cancers. And it's been a very interesting evolution from that point on, where now I'm very much into computational biology, and I do a lot of computational work. I've kind of self-taught myself over the last 2-3 years, and have been able to get some grant funding to support my work and to allow me to continue to do research 80% of the time. I still do clinic about 20% of the time, about 1 day a week or 1 week a month-ish of clinic, but the rest of the time I'm mostly doing computational research in pediatric sarcomas. So that's my journey. Happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Vicky, for the invitation. Happy to be here to answer questions afterwards. So for personal background, I was born in Venezuela in South America. I lived there for about 4 years. And after my parents decided that the economic and the government didn't really seem fit to have a family there, so we moved to Massachusetts. Which basically I lived for the majority of my life. Went to high school there, was always really interested in animals, wanted to be a vet when I grew up. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out because I found out early on that I was really allergic to most animals, which was kind of a sad affair for an 8-year-old who wanted to be a vet. But I continued wanting to understand evolution because I was really interested in evolution of animals. So I joined a small liberal arts school in Boston called Suffolk University, where I studied biology, got my BS in biology there. Got to learn a lot about evolution on an ecosystem scale, but I really developed this passion for molecular biology for 2 reasons. One, my aunt was actually diagnosed with both a breast cancer and also a lung cancer, 2 completely separate primary diseases. And that really, just the shock of it kind of put me in this state of wanting to understand what cancer was. And I also had the opportunity in undergrad to meet with a biochemistry professor who really instilled my curiosity at the bench. Asking questions, working with bacteria was super fun for me. And I got to ask, all these types of engineering questions that I was always really into when I was younger. I like to work on cars and stuff. So engineering and biology was kind of like a next step for me. But with the connections that I made in undergrad, she suggested that I should probably do some undergraduate research programs outside of my undergrad institution because it was a much smaller, less funded institution to do the types of bench work that you should get before you jump into science. And so she put me into contact with people at MIT who run an internship program over the summer called the MIT Research Undergraduate Research Program. And they're kind of, again, just instilled in me that research was something that I really wanted to do. As the first panelist, Alexis mentioned, like the day-to-day events in the lab are completely different. Nothing is ever, the same. Nothing is repeated over and over again. So I really liked that aspect of science. And I also liked the ability of being able to ask my own questions and answer my own questions, kind of let my curiosity do its thing. After I graduated from undergrad at Suffolk, I still decided that I needed a little bit more research experience, mostly because my research experience at that point was mostly centered on microbiology, but I knew that I was really actually interested in cancer biology. So from that point on, I joined Novartis. It was a brand new program at the time, like probably 10 years ago now. It was called the Gap Year Scholars Program. And that program was designed to have 2 years of research experience right after you would graduate from undergrad. You would work directly with either a PI at Novartis, or you would work with a postdoc that was at Novartis, and you would help them do experiments and learn their techniques. I worked under a postdoc. We worked on mantle cell lymphomas. I learned a lot about mammalian cell culture, something that I had absolutely no idea how to do beforehand. I learned about mutations, the spectrum of mutations that you can get within the same exact type of tumor, and how everything was slowly shifting over to a more molecular understanding, a genetic basis of cancer as a disease. Within mantle cell lymphoma, you had multiple different subtypes of diseases, even though they were all classified as mantle cell. And that was super interesting. And that was the first time that I got experience with learning about the therapeutic aspects. Novartis is a pharmaceutical company. And so, of course, for them, the major goal was to identify drugs that you could use to slow down the growth of tumors. So that was my first experience with that. And from then on, I really knew that, okay, cancer is for me. But I had learned how to do manipulation in cell culture. I understood the genetics of the disease. I understood different pathways that you needed to look at to inhibit certain pathways to make these tumors grow slower, whereas maybe a different mutation might make those tumors resistant to that initial drug. But what I really wanted to understand was how tumors arise and how do they interact with their microenvironments. And so for that, I did my PhD work at MIT under Tyler Jacks as my PI. And in the Jacks laboratory, what we do is we study the interactions between a tumor as it's arising and how they interact with immune cells, how they interact with stromal cells, how they interact with other tumor cells to then, what do these changes or what do these interactions mean in the context of treatment or in the context of the tumor as it progresses and becomes more aggressive. And so for that, our main model, instead of using cells, was to genetically engineer mice that had specific mutations that you would find in people. And so these mice were prone to developing diseases because they had these exact types of mutations that we would find in humans. And so my model in particular was the adenocarcinoma of the lung. It has particular mutations in genes called KRAS and P53. And so in order to induce these tumors, we would deliver viruses to the lungs of mice, and they would initiate tumors, all in the direct context of their native microenvironment. So tumors are transformed into cells are transformed into cancers. They start interacting with the immune system. They start interacting with stromal cells. And we could watch as these tumors evolved over time, something that you really can't do in people because, of course, you can't genetically engineer people, and it would be ethically wrong to do these types of experiments in people as well. But we could get these type of molecular details in mice. And I thought this was fantastic. And so my thesis centered around looking at mutations that were found in lung adenocarcinomas and modeling these mutations using this new technique called CRISPR-Cas9, which allows one to edit any gene of interest. And we moved these techniques over to in vivo work, where we're actually making mutations at will in mice, and then studying what the consequences were of mutation in these mice. And so we noticed that mutation of this one particular gene made the tumors grow worse. And we were interested in this, but really what we wanted to know was, well, we know that this particular gene makes tumors grow worse, but how do we stop it? And so my experience from Novartis kind of got around to doing and asking these questions of, well, how do we therapeutically target this particular subset of cancer? So now, again, we're getting back into the molecular details of disease, where we have a particular tumor that has these mutations. We add another mutation, and then we ask, well, how are they different in therapies? And so that to me was, it was a wonderful experience in graduate school. I got to learn a lot of different things: genetic modification, making mice, and engineering, which is kind of really what I've always liked to do. I'm still allergic to mice, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, but I still love to work with them. And then that brought me here. So I'm now a postdoc in the Charles Sawyer's laboratory. His lab really focuses on looking at how tumors naturally arise, therapeutic resistance. And so I thought this was the the logical next step is I understand how tumors can grow. I can model the disease as it's interacting with other cells. Now let's ask the question of, well, now let's model disease and then treat it with certain therapies and see how they evolve in that context, and seeing how treatment evolves or changes the microenvironment as well. So my current project right now is really focused to trying to understand why certain tumors naturally evade the immune response. So it's trying to model and engineering tumors to become kind of flagged for immune destruction, and then seeing how the tumor naturally evades these responses. And so with that, I think that's pretty much it for me. I'm happy to take questions afterwards during the Q&A. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for your overview. So we do have some questions submitted here in our Q&A portal. So I'll go with the first one. I believe it's addressed to Alexis. So the question is, as a research assistant, are you able to publish papers on projects under the PI? How much of your daily work is support for the postdocs and grad students versus your own projects given by the PI?
Yeah, so I've been at MSK for about 8 years now. It was literally the first job I got straight out of completing my master's. So I've had a really long time to kind of move up the ranks in the lab. I started as a research tech, which is kind of like entry level. I know one of the questions also concerned, how far can you go with a bachelor's degree? I would say most entry level positions, bachelor's degree, BS or BA in sciences, that's fine. Just addressing one of those earlier questions. So yes, I do publish papers. Actually, right now, I'm writing my first author publication that pertains to my project specifically. But when I first started out, I was mainly supporting postdocs and grad students. So I'm co-authored on a lot of their papers from the earlier years. But as I moved up the ranks and I became a lab manager, and I showed, my PI the aptitude that I have to think independently, and I have my own project now, and I am going to be publishing that independently. So it depends on your work ethic. I feel, even if you have a master's degree, you come in there, you show that you have the aptitude to really do well, to push projects forward. And a lot of PIs are they're more than happy to give you the opportunity, even if you aren't a PhD.
Great, thank you for that. We actually have another question for you, Alexis, more so talking about like your day-to-day. So how is working in the lab every day? Is there a schedule you follow, strict timelines, etc.?
So there are no strict timelines. When you're working for an institution, you have to work 8-hour, 40-hour normal work week. That is standard anywhere you go. But sometimes you have experiments that take 7, 8, 9, 16 hours to do. So I find myself coming in earlier for things, or staying later, or coming in on the weekend. So really it is, my schedule really does pertain around the particular experiments I have planned for that day, and every day is different. So no strict timelines. If research is what you're into, definitely no strict timelines. You can't tell a cell when to turn off. So you got to go with the flow for sure.
Great. The next question goes to Lilitha. So they're asking you more so about your MPH. So do you think it was a good decision to pursue that degree for your career? And could you elaborate a bit more about our CRCs, the Collaborative Research Centers?
Yeah, sure. For me, yes, personally, I think the MPH was a great, like I was saying, it sort of gave me a much more broader overview of how one sees health and disease, and that it's not just the biology that's involved. And you really have to consider so many other factors when you're trying to think about what can be the treatment, and how can people get access to these treatments. So, and it also gave me PhD gave me very basic science skills, research skills, critical thinking skills. MPH helped me hone that a lot, and gave me a much broader view of disease, and also gave me more skills in project management, because that sort of is a core of what you end up learning as part of a public health degree. And I think it also then helped me get to get to the first job that I got, which was managing the malaria project, and even this particular job. So in retrospect, I think that was the best decision. When I did it, it was mostly because I really wanted to get the MPH experience. The second part of the question, CRCs. So CRCs are collaborative research centers, and this is sort of a mainstay here at MSK. And the research center that I manage, the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy, is one of, I think we're over 20 different CRCs here at MSK. And each of these centers has sort of a very specific focus. So the way PICE focuses on cancer immunotherapy and initiatives related to cancer immunotherapy, we have centers that focus specifically on pancreatic cancer, on brain tumors, and a whole lot of, like I said, we are one of 20, PICE is one of like over 20 centers. So, and there is, like, you can get more information on CRCs at MSK. There's a web page sort of detailing each and every center, and then you can get information on each of the centers and what they do.
Thank you so much, Lilitha. So this next question, I think it's more so in relation to Mike. So they asked you about dividing your time between clinic and the lab as a research scientist. Do you follow a single patient and study them as well as treating them?
It's a great question. So the way it typically works is there usually isn't like a specific overlap between my research and clinic, but it ends up happening sometimes where maybe a patient I've seen or a patient someone in the group has seen, we've acquired their tumor, and I'll be working on kind of studying the evolution of their tumor in the lab, and if I get any insights, I'll share it with the team. But that's not necessarily the case for all patients. I'll typically pick up any new patients that will come when I'm scheduled for clinic. The way that it's set up now, it's essentially 1 day a week, or about 20% of my time is dedicated to clinic. But just because you have 1 day in clinic doesn't mean the clinical work stops then. Then there's a lot of coordination of care and follow-up emails and speaking with patients about test results, and so that starts to eat into your research time a little bit. But it's kind of one of those expected parts of the job. But yeah, no, I mean, for the most part, when I'm not in clinic, I'm prior to the pandemic, I was sitting at the lab bench, but mostly doing computational work. But it was nice to be around folks in the lab if I could bounce ideas off. Nowadays it's mostly working from home, doing kind of cluster computing, computational work, working on my research. But yeah, I guess that's how I divide my time.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. So this next question is a general question, so anyone could answer it. It asks, what are some opportunities or things that young high school students could do to help them develop their interest in biology and chemistry and a potential career in healthcare?
I mean, you guys are in this program right now, which is definitely helpful. So when I was at Environmental Studies High School, I actually did a program at the American Museum of Natural History. They also have a high school program. I was actually the first class for that program. And it was in conjunction with Rockefeller and Cornell. So I feel like seeking out these programs where you can spend your summers interning is super, super helpful. I mean, I did that throughout high school as well as college, and that's actually how I got into oncology. I did my work study in college in one of the labs there that was working in brain cancer. So I just feel like being super proactive about seeking those opportunities, especially we live in such a social world now. You can find anything on Twitter and Instagram and Googling. I mean, there's tons and tons of programs out there, so definitely take advantage.
Great. Does anyone else of our panelists want to comment on that? Okay, we'll go ahead. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would also say, like, remember you're in high school and enjoy that. I did nothing science related, like outside of school, in high school, and turned out okay. So, if it's picking up a summer job or, doing like learning to deal with people, I think is a great skill. I was a waiter for a couple summers, a lifeguard, just developing people skills early on in life can pay dividends down the road. So, okay not to, I know, like, I see what's going on in high school these days, and it's very competitive. I bet some of you kids got more publications than I do, but like, it's okay to take a step back and enjoy high school and just, develop. And when you get into college, then you can really, figure out what your passion is and get into it. But, remember, high school is a time to kind of learn, develop people skills, become well-rounded.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. It's important. Balance is important as well. This next question actually goes in line. So high school students, they're looking for experiences. It may not necessarily be research-based, but to shadow. Could you guys comment on how they could pursue those opportunities? I know that's a concern, especially now with COVID, with having non-clinicians in the hospital. So what are some ideas, if any, you think they could do to help engaging that experience? Anyone could answer, or Mike, did you want to answer since you're in?
Yeah, I mean, I can at least speak about that from the clinical side. So I think most people that I work with, and myself included, like, love having people shadow us. What we're often not, what's out of our control a lot of the times is like, uh, getting, I think at Memorial, you have to, go through some process to get cleared to shadow, with the details of which I don't know. So like the people that have shadowed me are usually like summer students in our lab or high school students in our lab, that are already like cleared and in the Memorial system. So then, then it's easy just to kind of bring them along because they have a badge. But obviously now with the pandemic, that becomes a lot tougher. But if I think maybe if you want to, like, more private practice doctors kind of thing, or probably it's a little easier to do more shadowing. I know it's tough to find a lot of people's emails sometimes, but if you can reach out to someone, either maybe through their social media or something, Twitter, like another participant was saying. So I think those are, I think we're all always happy to do it. It's just like the logistics.
Thank you for that. And I do like the suggestion about leveraging social media. That's why it's there to interact. So I highly recommend that. So the next question, I actually am interested in hearing Rodrigo's perspective about finding a mentor and what that process is like, because I think that's so crucial to your success as a postdoc. So.
Yeah, that's a great question, and very important. I can speak to that in terms of graduate school first and then looking for a postdoc. Most graduate programs will allow you a certain amount of time to kind of get a feel for many labs. They're called rotations, generally between 3 or 4 rotations. And depending on which program you go to, they could be anywhere from 4 weeks long to 2 months long. So relatively short amount of time, but at least in that amount of time, you can get a sense for how the mentor interacts with their students and their postdoc and staff, how people within that lab interact with each other. You get a feel for the science, what type of science they do. All labs and all lab heads will have some type of web page that will give a little bit of synopsis over what specifically their lab is interested in. And maybe they have a few projects that are kind of bullet points on their webpage. So you gotta get a sense for what the PI does at least. And then it might be a little bit hard since most kind of published work are behind a paywall, but some are free to access so you can read them, and they're relatively difficult at this stage in your lives to kind of follow. But at least you can see if it sparks your interest, and then you typically send an email off to that PI. But it's hard. It's really hard to gauge how to choose the right PI. It really depends on what you see yourself as. Some PIs are very hands-on and they will train their students directly. Usually these are kind of the newer PIs in the field that just started and opened their lab. And then there's people who are more hands-off. They're typically more established PIs that have larger labs, so it would be very hard for them to manage each individual person. And so if those types of labs, your mentors typically become the senior members of the lab, senior graduate students, senior technicians, postdocs. So it really depends on what style you like. Do you think that you need somebody there to kind of help you on the day-to-day grind? Or do you want to take more kind of active role? And, you know, I decided I wanted to do the latter. It was a struggle at first, for sure. But generally, you know, afterwards, you know, it's really everyone's decision what they would like to do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Rodrigo. So we do have a question here. For what advice would you give for folks that may want to change their careers and start looking at careers in science? What would you recommend that they do? Anyone to share?
I think it comes back to what we were talking about before. If you're really interested in science, you need to kind of put your foot in the door and start looking out for these research programs. And there's at least 1 or 2 research programs at every major research institution, whether that be a hospital like Sloan Kettering or an academic institution like, you know, MIT or Columbia or things like that. There's also a lot of programs that are at pharmaceutical companies. Like I myself went to Novartis. They have these summer research opportunities there as well. So I think connections are super important. I think in science, you know, you meet with somebody that can hook you up with somebody else, and then all of a sudden you're doing research at the bench, which is kind of what happened to me. So I think it's best to not be afraid and ask and email people. I know that there's a large activation energy to get over your fear of emailing someone, but really, like Michael was saying, I've never met anybody who would, you know, say, no, I don't want to shadow you, or no, I don't want to talk about my research. I love talking about my research to anyone that wants to know.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This next question, I'd like all the panelists to share their input. So it says, at your stage in your career, at an early stage in your career, did you receive any piece of advice that motivated you till now? So I'll start with Alexis and then.
Yes. This doctor that I met who's from Mexico, and she used to always tell me when I was working with her for a little while, she was one of my mentors, if you can't go through the front door, go through the back door. And I think, and that's something I actually have posted on my wall, like in my desk area, that I remember all the time. Because I think in society, we get so caught up on timelines and like, I have to graduate at this time and I have to have a job at this time and I have to do this at this age and I got to get married and it's just like, all of that just goes out the window. Like you live your life and your process is your process. And if you get a couple of no's for something that you're trying for, well, there's always a way around it. Networking definitely helps. And that's kind of what that whole phrase means. It's like, if you can't do something the traditional way, do it in your own way, because that's always going to be the best way for you.
Okay, great. Lilitha?
I completely echo what Alexis says. And I mean, the one thing that I guess one of my high school teachers had sort of ingrained was always remember that patience and persistence always helps. You know, like just don't give up if something doesn't work out. And always be on the lookout to gain new experiences and opportunities. You know, like you don't have to go down a traditional path of, it has to be an undergrad in science, then a PhD, then you can make it your own. And it sort of is what happened to me. I mean, when I went into my PhD, I didn't think I didn't think I would want to do an MPH and go down the road that I am doing right now. But it's been the best experience that I've had. And just enjoy whatever you're doing. I think that's most important. And I will also echo, you are in high school, so enjoy your time in high school. I think that's so important.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah, I can't really attribute this to one person, but it's something I've kind of followed for as long as I can remember, and it's kind of just like trust your gut. You know, you're going to face a lot of decision points in your life, and a lot of people are going to offer you advice and tell you to do X, Y, and Z. But like, just if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Follow your passion. And you'll be fine. You know, be careful of people who want you to do and see things the way they see them, and try to find people who are your mentors who are excited to foster whatever your passions are and help you lead there. A lot of the times, like, people like something because that's the only thing that they've been exposed to, and while there certainly may be something that they may want to pursue down the road, you know, especially when you're young in your career, like, stay open to other possibilities, and find people that are going to foster that for you.
Okay. Rodrigo?
Yeah, I completely agree with all of the panelists. I would definitely say just try it. There's nothing like actually doing science to really assess, is this what you want to do? And there's nothing wrong with just saying, no, this isn't for me. It's not a linear career path, as Lilitha was saying. It's not undergrad, grad school, and then, MD or starting your own lab in academia. There's so many alternative paths that you can do with the type of experience you'll get. So just don't knock it till you try it. And then if it doesn't end up, if you don't end up liking it, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have a question specific for Rodrigo. They're interested in knowing, after your postdoc, what comes next? Is the end goal to be in academia, like in a faculty position, or other paths?
That's a good question. That's something I'm still asking myself. I'm only a year into my postdoc. But I think I see myself going in the trajectory of trying to run my own lab in an academic institution. For me, that tends to center around wanting the most amount of freedom in doing what I would like to do, study what I would like to do. That's not to say that, places like pharmaceutical companies don't give you that level of freedom. It's just a little bit more restricted. You usually have to report to somebody else. So yeah, it depends. For me, it tends to be centered around academic studies, continuing academic studies. But again, that's not the only thing that you can do. We already had somebody talk about getting an MPH. You could think about maybe I don't really like science, and you can go into venture capital. You can go into more business-like. You can go into patent law as well. So it's not, like I said before, it's not just a linear trajectory.
Great, thank you. This next question as well, I'll have whomever wants to answer this. It's more so about, what essential skills do you need to become a cancer researcher? And I'll adopt that question, not necessarily technical skills, but also soft skills. What do you think is imperative in becoming a cancer researcher? Alexis, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'd say patience is definitely at the top of the list for me. You want to find answers as quickly as possible, especially when you have patients who reach out and, their families, and sometimes that aspect can be a little overwhelming, but you just kind of have to take a step back and remember that, things come in due time, and you will end up figuring it out, and just don't get frustrated with that. So having that type of rapport is very helpful, in addition to just the technical science skills, which I feel like everyone can have, but that personal aspect is also very important.
Okay, great, thank you. Would anyone else like to answer that question? Okay, great, thank you. So we do have a couple of other questions that were submitted here live. And one question I'm interested in is there a career mistake that you've experienced that have given you the biggest lesson? I think that people need to ponder a bit before answering that. So I'll give you guys a moment to reflect. But just thinking of a mistake that you went through that gave you a greatest lesson. Rodrigo, it seems like you have something.
Yeah, I mean, I could say this about, my day-to-day life in science. Like if I could go back and just tweak this in one way or another, like add a different reagent so it worked, I would do it. But I don't think I've ever come across any situation where like I wish I could just go back and just never do it ever. I think in science you learn the most from failing. And unfortunately, for people who are in science, we know that the vast majority of the things that we do just don't pan out. And that's a learning experience. And that's how science evolves.
Great. Anyone else would like to share? Okay. I see we do have a participant, Nathaniel. They raised their hands. Let me see. Nathaniel, would you like to ask your question? I'll unmute you. Okay. I think they're fine. So we'll continue on. So this is actually it's more so of a comment because we are coming to our close. If there's any takeaway advice you would give to our students, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to their careers, what would it be? Especially in this time of COVID and them having to adapt and pivot, what would you recommend for them for their continued success? And I'll start with Lilitha.
Well, I would say networking is important. So that's something you can continue to do even under current situations. So reach out to people, ask questions, never hesitate to ask any questions that you have. Be patient. And again, I'll repeat again, enjoy your time in high school. This time never comes back. So have fun in high school and you'll be able to figure out what you're really passionate about and go for it when the time comes.
Mike?
Yeah, kind of echoing off Lilitha and similar comments. Just don't become tunnel visioned. Be well-rounded. Try new things. A lot of these positions in science, you're gonna have to interview for. You're gonna have to present yourself, and you're gonna want to be able to talk about experiences and yourself and your life, and you want to be someone who's interesting and has something interesting to say. So that only comes from putting yourself out there and trying new things. So if you love science, great, but I'm sure there's other things, cooking, athletics, whatever it is you enjoy, pursue any and all passions and just be well-rounded. There's a lot of overlap between cooking and science, and you'll find out like the worlds all come together. So pursue all your passions. You'll be great.
Thank you, Mike. Alexis?
Yeah, I would say the same thing in addition to what Mike said. I definitely have a lot of extracurricular activities, so that's very important to make sure that you are mindful of the things that you like. And also, I guess in this time during this pandemic, it's good to just check in with yourself and check in with your friends. I mean, we have so many platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all this stuff now. So, I mean, at least something that I like to do every Friday, I like to check in with a group of friends or family members just to have like roundtable discussions about things you like and how things are going, and just kind of just remember to always center yourself a bit and don't get so caught up in like what am I going to do for your career, because remember, your career is a very small part of your life, so don't get so hung up on it, for sure.
Great. And Rodrigo, last but not least.
Yeah, so I would say also like have patience. You have many years ahead of you to gain these experiences, which will naturally happen while you are going through, going to undergrad. You might meet a professor like me who put you into contact with someone else. And I think these types of interactions just naturally happen. So have patience, these things will happen. Persistence is also key. If somebody says no, don't give up. That doesn't mean that you're never destined to do this type of, this type of thing. Keep trying, keep knocking on people's doors, or go through the back door, like Alexis said. And I think one very important thing is to just keep an open mind. You never know what you might run into that might maybe completely change your perspective of what you want to do in the future, or might solidify your ideas. Yeah, it might come from somebody that you might least expect it from too. So just keep an open mind. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure getting to know a bit about you and your work. And I know the students as well, and all of our attendees have greatly appreciated it. So on behalf of myself and our HOPP faculty and Eder as well, we'd like to thank you all as well for participating. So before we close, I just wanted to share a couple of things with our attendees. This is our last session, but we want to remind you that all of our seminars are recorded. So if you'd like to watch them or share them with friends, you can do so here on our YouTube page. And lastly, for 2021, we haven't opened we have not opened our application cycle, but we will do so. If you'd like to be notified about applying for next year's summer program, on our website, you could just submit this form, enter your contact information, and you'll be notified about any updates. Again, thank you all for participating. It's been a pleasure engaging with you all for the past 2 months, and we wish you all the best and continued safety and good health. Thank you again to our panelists, and everyone have a great day. Bye, everyone.